Hello, we're Paul and Judy Mattis, and we want to take a few minutes to talk about the vision loss journey that Judy's been on since December 6th of 2025, going through January 13th, 2026. We also want to not just tell you the events that took place, but to give you some insights into how God has been working behind the scene. So, for example, the first point to be identified is the timing was just amazing. Well, yes, it was a bad situation, but the timing fell when it was ideal for us in a sense. The semester had just ended. All that was left were final exams and final grades to be completed. So Judy had very little activities that were needed as it relates to what was going on campus. I had retired earlier in the year, so I was out the entire fall semester. And that meant when this began on December 6th, I did not have any responsibilities that took my time and attention. So I could be with her the entire time. So I didn't have to finish the fall, nor did I have to get ready for the spring. So that part was just really, truly amazing for that to be a good option for us. So Judy's going to tell you the things that took place, and I'll add some comments. And together we'll try to identify the things that God has been doing. Because it's really, that's just our journey, but it's really a story of what God's been doing.
So early in December, actually the end of November, I developed a head cold, really just a simple head cold. I had a couple of days where I had a very low-grade fever, but overall it was really just a simple head cold. And I was coming off of about 2 weeks of that on December 6th, and I just noticed that on that day, my eyes just seemed scratchy. And my husband did say that my right eye looked a little bloodshot, and I honestly thought it just had to do with the cold. My vision was fine. That evening, I decided to go to bed early, but my eyes bothered me most of the night in terms of they were just uncomfortable because of being scratchy. So I woke up early on Sunday morning, and my vision was fine. I texted the urgent care and got in line to be one of the first to be seen that morning as soon as they opened. And I woke Paul and told him what I was going to do. And so he took me to urgent care, and we were there, and they tested my vision, which was fine. I had no issues with seeing at that point. They looked at my eyes, and they agreed that they thought it could be that possibly my cold had gone to my sinuses, and it was just irritating my eyes. There was some pressure. So they gave me some drops and an antibiotic, and we came home. Well, because I'd had a rough night and had gotten up very early, I decided I was going to lie down and rest, but Paul went on to church that morning. So I lay down, and I was down for about 2 hours. When I woke up, my vision had changed. It was like I was looking through a gray fog. I could see the text because I texted Paul at church and told him that my vision had changed, and I was a little scared, wondering what was going on. Well, church was ending, and so he came home, and my vision remained about the same throughout the day. And because we had just seen the doctor at urgent care and just started on the antibiotic, we decided since nothing further was happening, we would just wait and see if the antibiotic would take hold, and I would start to see some improvement. So we went to bed that night, and in the early morning hours of Monday morning, we both woke, went to the bathroom, and when we turned the light on, I told Paul, it was just like this just huge flash of light, almost blinding to me. And I told him I was having trouble making out hardly anything. And so he knew my vision had deteriorated in the night. And he said, we're going to the emergency room. And that's what we did. At the emergency room, I could see objects. They were blurry. It was kind of light and dark. So I could tell where there were chairs, so I could navigate around the chairs because the floor was white and the chairs were darker. Things were more black and white and grays to me at that point. So they looked at my eyes. They saw that both eyes were bloodshot, and my pressures were higher than they should be. They were in the low 30s. The doctor touched my eyeballs, and he said, your eyeballs are very hard. So he called the ophthalmologist who was on call to get her opinion. And the ophthalmologist that was on call actually is my eye doctor, my ophthalmologist that I see on a regular basis. And she said that she wasn't overly concerned about the pressure at that point because it was not in the danger zone. But she told them some drops to give me, and then she said that she wanted me to make an appointment as soon as the office opened that morning so that she could see me that day.
So that's one example from our perspective of how God had worked so that person who would know her vision best under normal circumstances was the one on call who gave the directives to the folks in the emergency department as to what would need to be done before she would see Judy that afternoon.
So that morning was the very first day of finals. I had a 7:50 a.m. final that had to be given. Well, I knew I didn't see well enough to really do it myself, but Paul could do it. So we went up to the school, and my department chair was there, and we shared with her what was going on. At that point, I could see to navigate the building. I could tell, where the doors were and the hallways and so forth. But things, again, were blurry, and I was just seeing a lot of grays and blacks and whites and not being able to see real detail. So Paul conducted my final for me, and in the meantime, I sat with my graduate assistant, and everything got taken care of for the remainder of my finals that week, because at that point I knew that I was not going to be able to conduct my finals. I didn't know what was in store for me, but I knew that if my vision didn't just suddenly improve, I would not see well enough to do my finals. So my graduate assistant, who's excellent, worked with the department chair, and they managed to cover the rest of my finals. On that day, though, when my first final was over, students started coming out of the room, and while I could see images, I could see that there was a shape in front of me. I could not make out their faces at that point. So once that final was over, Paul and I went to the doctor. It was a little bit later. It was a 1:00 appointment. She saw me for about 5 minutes, and at that point she said, "I don't know what I'm looking at, but I cannot even see the back of your eyes. There's stuff in your eyes." She didn't know if it was pus or what it was, but she told us, "I want you to get in your car and get down to Ohio State University Hospital right now." She said, "Don't go home. Get there now. This is not an eye infection. This is something systemic in your body. It's attacking your eyes, and we do not have the ability in Mount Vernon to handle this. You must get to Ohio State right now." I looked at her, and I said, "Am I losing my vision?" And she looked at me and said, "I don't know." So we got in our car and headed to OSU. On the drive down, and that was about maybe 1:30, 1:45 in the afternoon. That was about, as we drove down, I noticed that my vision, while I could see light, I couldn't really make out objects along the road. So we drove down to Ohio State, to the hospital, to the emergency room, and parked and checked in, went through triage, and then went into the waiting room. We waited in the general waiting room about an hour, and then ophthalmology came to take us up to ophthalmology and their area. And we were in the waiting area there for probably, I don't know, maybe close to 3 hours. But during that time, they put an IV in, or the port. They weren't running anything yet, but a port for the IV. And they also took several blood samples, and I had several different doctors, residents, even a medical student, coming and asking me all kinds of questions. They were trying to figure out or get some initial data on what could have caused this. And so that time was filled with interaction with a lot of people and waiting and more waiting. And finally, at about 8:00, ophthalmology, and this was 8:00 in the evening, came and took me into an exam room. And it was a resident, a second-year resident, Dr. C. He told us to call him Dr. C because he said his name was kind of a mouthful. So we're going to call him Dr. C. And he started about a 3-hour, 4-hour exam that included asking me a million questions, looking at my eyes, talking us through some things, making notes. I mean, it was a very, very involved and very lengthy time. And during that time, he said, I really believe that my fellow is going to want to start injections in your eye to start attacking this because it is happening so rapidly, and it's happening to both eyes almost simultaneously. And so at the conclusion of his exam, he went and talked to his fellow and came back and said, yes, my fellow has agreed that we need to do two things. We want to give you injections in both eyes to start some antibiotics. And the other thing is we want to, what they call tap my right eye to try to draw out some of the junk that was in there to try to culture so they could start to see if they could figure out what it was, because he said the same thing my ophthalmologist said in Mount Vernon. He said, we can't even see the back of your eyes. We can't tell if there's damage. We can't see anything back there. And so we need to know what's going on. So at that time, the fellow came in, Dr. Ochoa, and he sat on my right and Dr. C was on my left, and they were literally right next to me. And yet I could not even make out their faces. I could never have picked them out on the street if I'd seen them. So even though they were that close to me, my vision had deteriorated. They were just blobs. I saw images, but it was blobs. I could not make out any detail at all. So at that point, they started the process, and it was a lengthy process because it was late at night. We were now talking about, it was after 12:30, so it was actually the next morning, really.
So it's really now Tuesday.
Yeah.
And we're getting close to 1:30 in the morning.
And because it was so late, pharmacies were closed, and they had to go over to another building in the OSU system, and the transport was kind of shut down. So the Dr. C actually ran the gamut to the other buildings to get the medicines that we needed, and there was a process of preparing them for injection. They had to prepare me for injection, and I was very tense, not so much about the injections, because at that point I just desperately wanted them to do anything that would help me get my vision back. I was not going to say no to anything, but it had been pretty traumatic at that point. I think Paul and I were both still in shock. We just never expected that my vision would go so quickly, and I don't think we either one fully grasped what was happening in its fullness. But we sat there and waited. They deadened my eyes because obviously that, would make the procedures much easier. Unfortunately, because my eyes were so inflamed, the pressure was high. There was so much inflammation. And I was also very, very tense. The deadening wasn't quite what it should have been. And that's not the doctor's fault. They deadened it based on their many years of experience. The fellow had been doing this for a long time. It just wasn't quite enough for me. And when Dr. Ochoa, the fellow, started doing the tap, I said, I feel that. You could tell he was really upset, not at me. He was upset because he didn't want to cause me any more pain than I was already in, and any more trauma than I'd already experienced. And you could tell he was just deeply saddened by that. However, you couldn't stop in the middle of the procedure. He had to finish that part of the procedure. And so he did it as quickly as he could while maintaining the integrity, of the actual procedure. And once he finished, they immediately deadened my eyes some more so that when they did the injections, I would not have any more pain. Unfortunately, the pain level from the tap had just escalated, and it wasn't the pain in my eye, it was in my head. It was as if an axe had been taken and just split my skull open. That's really the best way I can describe the pain I was feeling.
So to give you an idea of what was the logic that was going on, there was inflammation in the eye. That part was the obvious. The question was what was causing it. One of the concerns was there was an infection, and if it was, then it would need to be dealt with, because if it got spread throughout the whole body, it could be even life-threatening. So they went under the assumption that it was an infection. Fast forward to the end of the story, it was not, it never was, but that was the logic as to why those injections were given. So they were injections of antibiotics, antiviral agents, and I believe even some antifungal agents, just to make sure, just to be safe. So that was why that was done. That was why it had to be done so quickly, because they did not want the condition to worsen if that was what was going on. And they explained to us, if that's not the issue, the other things move more slowly anyway. So there would be time. It's not going to hurt anything to do the injections, other than the pain, of course. But it's a way to keep the condition as under control as possible while you're trying to find out what the issue was.